Hey guys, it's Lancey again, and welcome back to my channel. In the last video that I talked about Sly Cooper, we went over some of the villains that I thought was on the lower spectrum of Sly Cooper villains. But now in this video, we're going to cover some of my favorite Sly Cooper villains of all time. Or in this case, the greatest Sly Cooper villains of all time, in my opinion. And for this video, we're going to do this based on what I went with the last format in terms of the 20 villains and then taking out the two of them that became good guys and then combining the two of them into one, So if you watched the last video, then, well, yeah. And for this video, it's going to be pretty much in a similar format where I go into detail about each character's history and then why I think they deserve to be on the list and why I have them at the certain placement that I have them at. So, without further ado, let's get into this video. Guys, just sit back and enjoy the ride and let me know your opinions in the comment section down below. Now let's get to it. Number 10. Captain LaFouille from Sly 3. I'm gonna be honest with you, I had this guy a bit higher on the list, but I had to dock him in terms of points because of another betrayal by another certain character that ended up actually being really controversial. So that's why I had to bring LaFouille down a bit on the list. However, that's not to say that he's a bad villain either. That's just to say that if it wasn't for Penelope's betrayal, then he definitely would have been much higher on this list. So let's talk about LaFouille. So Captain LaFouille has been sailing the 7 seas for almost as long as anyone can remember, and he earned the reputation of being the smartest man of the 7 seas. For he beat Black Spot Pete out in a ship fight, which he got the treasure map, which held the key to Dimitri's treasure at the time. Also, when the Cooper gang managed to find Dimitri's treasure on the island, he raided and cornered the Cooper gang and kidnapped Penelope so that they could get away from his treasure. And he was basically gonna either kill Penelope or force Penelope to marry him. So yeah, the dude's a real psychopath. But okay, so here's one of the reasons why I think LaFouille deserves to be in this top 10 list. For starters, the man is a real cold-blooded killer, even killing his own employees if it meant they just messed up in the slightest way, or even just talk back to him to give him a good point about something. But obviously this dude doesn't like being told what to do or like being wrong, and given that he's, earned that reputation for being the smartest man to ever, be on a pirate ship, you can see why he gets so easily tempered or rattled by something or someone who says that he's wrong. And aside from that, I truly think that he's a cold-blooded killer, and again, if it wasn't for Penelope's betrayal, I truly would have had him higher on the list because he was willing to kill one of the Cooper gang's most trusted members, quote unquote trusted. So, but he is cold-blooded, but I say not as he doesn't. And another reason why I don't have him very high on the list either is because unlike the other Cooper villains that I have on this list, he doesn't have a personal vendetta against the Cooper gang. He just really didn't want the Cooper gang in his business like that, So that's all I have to say about LaFouille, and I think he deserves to be number 10 on this list. Number 9. Don Octavio from Sly 3. Given that Sly 3 was my very first Sly Cooper game, Don Octavio definitely left a good impression on me. Plus, his world is probably my favorite Sly Cooper world of all time, but I'll talk about that in another video. So, let's talk about Don Octavio. Don Octavio used to be an opera singer in Venice, Italy, but because opera was starting to lose its popularity to rock and roll, he ended up getting fired, which left him disgruntled and embarrassed. However, he ran into the Italian mafia that brought him into quote-unquote the business, and in this business he was gonna make a plan to blow up buildings in Venice for people that didn't come to his opera recital, his comeback opera recital. So he went through all this crappy stuff that he did with polluting the water with tar, willing to blow up buildings in order for people to come out and see his opera recital. The man is really just sadistic and cold-blooded. Do I think he's as cold-blooded as some of the other villains on this list? definitely not. I just say more so that if it wasn't for him getting fired from the opera, I truly think he wouldn't have gone the route that he went. But again, that's a lot of Sly Cooper villains. They're a bunch of disgruntled people that are out for revenge against the world for what they did to him. So I just personally think Don Octavio's story was more so put together well, because he actually became more surreal the later on in his story. Like, he did not care about the safety or well-being of others if it meant his opera recital or opera career per se to get back on track. So I truly think that makes him one of the more deadliest Sly Cooper villains on this list. Also, I just love his personality in here and how he's like, singing to himself when he's walking around the area, and how, he feels so confident in himself and everything, even if people don't, show up to the recital. He just knows that, he has the power over the people. He has the resources that he can literally do whatever he wants in the town of Venice, because he has so many connections to the Italian mafia. So that's one of the reasons why he's number 9 on this list. But I don't have him any higher on this list, mainly because, like Lafouille, he doesn't have a personal vendetta against the Cooper gang. They're just getting in his business, and he doesn't want any of that. Number 8. Rajan from Sly 2. Rajan is definitely one of the more deadliest Sly villains in my opinion. He's definitely what El Jefe should have been in Sly 4, but Rajan just handled his role much better in my opinion. So let's talk about Rajan's origins. Rajan sold spice, quote unquote, is actually drugs, but yeah, Rajan sold spice at a very young age, and he kept selling spice till he became basically an underground millionaire that he helped to run not only his spice empire, but to grow his prestige in the black market as well. Also, Rajan is the very first Sly Cooper villain to have 2 worlds dedicated to himself, so that's a major plus in my book. His first area is basically a mini town that has a ballroom that he had planned for a party to happen so that he could show off the Clockwork wings for his prestige. But thanks to Sly and the gang, they managed to steal the Clockwork wings and escape, thus ruining Rajan's not only his reputation, but his prestige in the black market as well. And because of this, Rajan retreated back to his spice temple deep in the jungle. However, the Cooper gang wasn't through with him yet, because the Cooper gang had also learned that Rajan had the Clockwork heart on him. And the heart was what was pumping his spice empire to numerous levels, because the heart was literally not going to give out, thanks to, Clockwork making his heart out of pure metal and hate. And while the Cooper gang managed to stop Rajan and get the Clockwork part, it was at the cost, because Rajan actually served as a distraction for Neela indirectly. So that's another reason why I think he deserves to be on this list, is that even though he wasn't the main reason for the Cooper gang getting arrested, he was indirectly responsible for them getting distracted long enough for them to get arrested. So Rajan deserves to be in the number 8 spot for me. Number 7. Mugshot from Sly 1, Sly 3, and the animated short promoted for Sly 4. Mugshot to me definitely deserves to be in this top 10 list, given that he's been in almost every Sly game since the game's inception. He's basically like that villain that will show up just to give Sly a headache, or Sly just feels like picking on him for any particular reason. So let's talk about this man's origin story. Mugshot was once a small pup that kept getting picked on when he was younger. However, he grew fascinated in different gangster movies and wanted to become as big as buff as some of those guys in those gangster movies. He started working out a lot growing up, and he became such a big brute that he actually could walk with his arms instead of his legs. And with this newfound strength, he managed to not only beat up his bullies real bad, but he ended up becoming one of the most feared men in the entire country of the US. Sometime later, he came across Mesa City and ended up taking it over, making it his own little dog empire. Afterwards, he would later meet up with the Fiendish Five and end up joining them and not only killing Sly's father, but also stealing the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus, even though he particularly found no use or interest in them, given that it has too many big words for his liking. Then, why would you steal the book? I mean, seriously. If it has no value to you, why would you steal someone else's book like that? Years later, Sly managed to catch up to Mugshot in Mesa City, and thwarted Mugshot's plans and efforts. Mugshot would then later be arrested by Carmelita for his actions. Ended up being thrown in jail, along with the rest of the Fiendish Five members that were still alive at the time, but somehow he managed to escape within the events of Sly 2 and Sly 3. Sometime later, during Sly 3's game, we ended up finding Mugshot in the episode Flight and Fancy, where he's a part of the dog-fighting airplane battles. And it turns out Mugshot had been a part of that for a couple of years now, even though the comic said he was still in jail. So maybe he broke out of jail and then got thrown back in jail or something, but I don't know how the comic went or how the story's supposed to go, but I'm just assuming that's what happened. So yeah, we get to see Mugshot again, and it's actually nice getting to see him in this game again. However, he has a very good memory, remembering what happened 3 years ago in Mesa City, so he plans on not only wrecking the Cooper airplane, but also ruining Sly's chances at winning the competition as well. Luckily, Bentley and Murray managed to thwart Mugshot's plans, even though Mugshot planned revenge. After the events of the Cooper hangar defense, Mugshot starts to get eyed very closely by the Black Baron. Penelope, actually. But yeah, so it's because of this that the Cooper gang manages to use this to their advantage by goading Mugshot into a fight, in which Bentley says that Mugshot's mother basically has more gentleman collars than the operator. I don't want anybody to think about that too hard. Seriously, don't think about it too hard what he said. So obviously this infuriates Mugshot very well, and understandable, so Mugshot agrees to the fight outside. However, the Cooper gang had decided to make a reverse psychology switch, in which they actually trick Carmelita, who was in the area at the time of Holland, to fight Mugshot instead so that she could take Mugshot to jail, thus eliminating him from the flight competition, in which the Cooper gang would later win, and Mugshot would get thrown in jail again. And then let's talk about the animated short, which I would assume had to happen during the events of either Sly 1 or Sly 2, given that the story calls for it because, you know, so many things happened, and it wouldn't make sense about certain things happening the way they did, but... So, in this case, Mugshot is on a blimp, and he has a stolen treasure that apparently Cooper wants, and... surprise, surprise, Carmelita's in the area too, and the two managed to stop Mugshot together. But because, you know, they're on opposite sides of the law, Carmelita threatens to arrest Cooper, but Cooper kisses her instead, and leaves the treasure with Carmelita actually. Carmelita blushes at this fact, and the Cooper gang just shakes their head at what Sly did for Carmelita, and then that's what leads into what would happen in Sly 4. Where Sly's holding a photo of the Cooper gang together and he's with Carmelita. Mugshot's inclusion was warranted for a lot of reasons. One, he's truly that villain that just shows up just to give the Cooper gang a hard time, so he definitely deserves to be on this list. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did come back for another Sly Cooper game, given that he's held such an importance to the Sly Cooper series. He's strong, he's powerful, he's buff. He's not the smartest guy in the box, but I will say he definitely does know what he's doing whenever he has to deal with the Cooper gang at times. Okay guys, so this next section of video, I'm putting a disclaimer out here. If you have arachnophobia by any chance, skip this section of the video. I'll leave a timestamp either in the comment section or in the video here. So just fair warning. Number 7. The Contesta from Sly 2. Guys, the Contesta made me dread playing Sly 2 for the longest time, and it was one of the reasons why I quit playing Sly 2 for the longest time too. I had a huge fear of spiders growing up, and the fact that in the second world we get to see the Contesta herself, the fact that we actually get to see her actually be one of the main characters in this game just made me dread everything. And the fact that I literally found out years later that she was a member of the Claw Gang, which meant we was gonna have to fight her either way. So... But yeah, so here's the deal with the Contesta. As far as I'm concerned with her origin story, the origin story is she was a college student who studied psychology, and she married a wealthy aristocrat, and then the two were having a drink together, and the aristocrat quote-unquote mysteriously died. Gee, I wonder who did that. So, because of this, the Contesta not only inherited his house, but he also inherited his wealth and the resources that allowed the Contesta to put her psychology studies to use. She ended up turning his house into basically like a mental home for a lot of thieves, criminals, and even people who have mental problems. And apparently the results were actually pretty darn good, that the thieves afterwards actually had good results in their life happen. But apparently there's more that meets the eye to this, and we learn about this through Bentley going on a little reconnaissance photo. It turns out the Contessa was a secret member of the Claw Gang all along, and she would actually hypnotize her criminals locked up in that crazy house to actually eat spice on the food, and this would make the criminals or whoever was in there go crazy. And it was that hatred that later another villain that I'll talk about in a second would use to actually create the hate hypnotic show in order to rebuild Clockwork later on in the game. So the Contessa basically was a lying, conniving undercover cop who was actually a member of a gang and was using it not only to get thieves of their money, but she was indirectly responsible for helping Apeggio rebuild Clockwork, even though she didn't know what that was Apeggio's true motives at the time. And she's a spider. We all know that most spiders in entertainment and media are very, very mean and scary. Unless you're Spider-Man, of course. Spider-Man's the only exception. So Bentley manages to break Sly and Murray out of jail, but the Contessa manages to escape from their grasp. And we learn later that she had the Clockwork eyes, which was the reason why her hypnosis treatments were working so well. And she had Carmelita captured. So now, like, it's a race against time, because not only does the Cooper Gang have to steal the Clockwork parts, but they have to save Carmelita as well, otherwise she's gonna take the fall for Contessa's corruption at Interpol. So it took a lot of tricky maneuvering, but the Cooper Gang managed to stop the Contessa and defeat her and get the Clockwork eyes, but it took a lot of, and I mean a lot of misdirection and a lot of distractions for that to happen. Like a lot of the plan that Bentley had went haywire, and the Cooper Gang had to figure out how to adapt to it accordingly. So the Contessa was later arrested, and Neela, you know, the quote-unquote hero of Prague, was promoted to the captain. So, and Carmelita ended up having to be on the run from Interpol because she was framed by both the Contessa and Neela for their actions that Carmelita never did. And according to the end credit screen, the Contessa actually managed to become a real estate agent after spending time in jail. But, albeit a very, slimy one at that. The Contessa ranks number 6 on this list for numerous reasons. 1, if you ever fear spiders, she's definitely your most hated villain. But number 2 is more important than number 1, and that's the fact that she managed to pull the wool over so many people's eyes. The fact that she managed to steal from other criminals using the power of Interpol, the quote-unquote side of justice, that takes a lot of doing and a lot of sneaky work to pull that off. Secondly, she feels like a villain that's never out for the count. No matter how many times you beat her, it literally takes a lot more to take her down, and that's kind of poetic given that she has 2 different episodes. But I also feel that she literally was doing so much evil underneath the quote-unquote good that she was doing that nobody would have detected it had it not been for the Cooper Gang. And she definitely would have ranked higher on this list if it wasn't for the fact that there was another character in this game that actually pulled the wool over so many people's eyes better than what Contesta did. Number 5. Apeggio from Sly 2. Okay, so hear me out, guys. I know this guy barely had any screen time on here, but just hear me out as to why I think he deserves to be in this top 10 list, let alone number 5 on the list. So, Apeggio was a small bird growing up, and he was so angry at the size of his body that he developed a plan to make sure that he had a bigger body per se. But then sometime later, that desire for wanting a bigger body transitioned into something even more evil and conniving. wanting immortality just so you could live forever. And the way he went about it was probably the sickest and most twisted way of doing it, but it was so cleverly planned out that no one would have ever picked up on it if he hadn't explained the plan. We first see Apeggio in the first world of Rajan's area, where he's basically like, just enjoying the party basically that Rajan's throwing. And then later on we see Apeggio again and hear from him in Worlds 6 and 7 with John Bassan's area, and basically how he's getting ready to pick up the Northern Light battery just so he can, power up his ship. Plus, apparently, he bought all the Clockwork parts from John Bassan in that meeting that they had too. So, this guy apparently is the quote-unquote leader of the group that we didn't even know we was fighting the whole time. Quote-unquote. The Cooper gang managed to get to the main part of his ship, in which they would attempt to destroy the Clockwork parts, but actually managed to meld the pieces together, causing Clockwork to be reassembled easily. Apeggio sees this and comes across Sly Cooper too, and this is where Apeggio explains the whole point of his plan. Sly was actually very ignorant about what Apeggio's true dream was with Clockwork parts, and this is where Apeggio explains the whole plan to Sly and the gang, basically. Apeggio was making a hypnotic light show to bring Clockwork back to life. Clockwork needed to be put together and then have a host in it to be able to come back to life. But he needed the one thing that made Clockwork drive himself and keep himself alive for so long. Hate. How do you get that hate? Through the other members of the Claw Gang. He would use the Claw Gang members for his own evil purposes and bring a Clockwork back to life. Here's how he went about this plan. Remember how I said in the earlier video that spice makes people angry and short-tempered? Well, this is basically the whole gist of his plan. He had Rajan make the spice, John Bassan would transport it to every part of the country in the world, the Contesta would feed it to her criminals, while Dimitri sold it in his nightclub. With all that spice being sold, hate was gonna consume people left and right, and it was with that he would actually be able to not only revive Clockwork, but the fact that John Bassan was in Canada and he was gathering the Northern Light energy source to be able to fuel Clockwork's hate chip is just beyond cruel, maniacal, and conniving, but evilly smart at the same time. Also add to the fact that he was basically using the Cooper gang to help him steal back the Clockwork parts indirectly, because he knew that the other Claw gang members wouldn't give up their parts so easily. Aside from John Bassan, who basically just forked over all the Clockwork parts with no fight whatsoever. But it is because of this master plan that Apeggio to me deserves to be in the top 5 of this list. He orchestrated everything that happened in Sly 2 to such perfection, and his plan almost came to fruition if it wasn't for the fact that a certain character betrayed him and killed him in the process. Number 4. Dr. M from Sly 3. Dr. M may be a controversial pick for a lot of people because I know that Sly 3 is one of the more hated games in the series, but I had to put him in here for the sole reason that he was basically the Bentley to Sly's father's gang, and the fact that he was willing to kill, Sly's father's only son is, beyond cruel and beyond sickening. And also add to the fact that this man is very, very paranoid about everything he's done. And there's a theory out there that I will talk about in a second, but let me cover this man's origin story, or what we know about him at least. So Dr. M was working with Connor Cooper and his gang along with McSweeney, and apparently at some point in time Dr. M felt that he wasn't getting the respect nor share the wealth that he felt he deserved from Sly's father. So Connor Cooper ended up kicking him out of the gang, and by that point I assumed that the gang was going to disband anyway, because they'd already pulled off some crazy jobs in the world by that point, so who knows. But yeah, and here's where the theory comes in. I'd like to think, just maybe, Dr. M tipped off Clockwork as to where Sly's father was living or hiding at. And it was because of this that Clockwork used this information to actually find and kill Connor Cooper and leave Sly at the orphanage where he would eventually find Bentley and Murray. That's just a theory I have. It may not be the greatest theory in a lot of people's eyes, but that's what I think personally happened. And if they had explicitly said that in the game, I personally think Dr. M would be ranked as a much better villain in a lot of people's eyes. But as of right now, we don't know if that's true or not, so I'm just going to leave it as that. The only thing I will say, from what we see in the game, the man is extremely paranoid, having built up his fortress on Kane Island to be as strong as Fort Knox, per se. And the fact that he has little to no regard for his contemporaries either, killing an employee because he literally forgot to change the passcode, that is just beyond maniacal and beyond sickening. So, you know, this man has a lot of, like, hate going for him. Dr. M's inclusion in this list is based solely on the fact that he had a connection to Sly before Sly even knew about it. Add to the fact that he may have been the reason why Connor Cooper got killed by Clockwork, and this dude probably would have ranked top 3 in my opinion, probably even number 2. But it was just the fact that we don't know if he was the reason why Clockwork found Connor Cooper in the first place. But his persistence, his paranoia, and the fact that he was willing to kill Sly, his partner in crime's only son, just show that this man does not care about anything or anyone except himself and what he can get his hands on. Number 3. General Sal from Sly 3. This chicken is absolutely insane. It is almost incredible how this chicken even got past the censors for video games. General Sal is a rooster and the self-appointed leader of a village in the Kulan Mountains back in Panda King's area per se. He's the main antagonist for the best chapter, in my opinion, of any Sly game, A Cold Alliance, and I'll talk about why in another video. But yeah, General Sal has to gotta be by far one of the most maniacal Sly Cooper villains ever put in a video game. He's abusive, having seen on camera kicking a puppy twice. He's misogynistic for a certain comment he made about Jing King. He's sociopathic because he's literally bringing dead people back to life to use them as his own self-appointed army. He's self-absorbed, believing his family line is better than Cooper and brag about it every chance he gets. And he's paranoid because, let's go back to the other stuff and recite it again. He kicked a puppy, he had a sexist comment about Jing King, and he's bringing dead people back to life to use as his own zombie army. This dude is absolutely crazy in the head, and it's just beyond paranoid to what he thinks he calls as intruders. I will say though, this man is very intelligent, and when he has to take matters into his own hands, he definitely will if he has to, which definitely makes me respect him more as a villain, rather than someone who just says all this crap or does this crap and doesn't do it back to anybody else. So guys, General Sal is a top 3 Sly Cooper villain for me all time because 1, not only of all the crap that he pulled on the Cooper gang and innocent people as well, but the fact that his presence alone made me dread everything and tread everything carefully. Like when I was playing Chapter 4 Cold Alliance, I had to be aware of everything I was doing and make sure I didn't do anything to mess up anything. Because it's like, we had never seen a villain who was that prepared for anything or anyone up until that point in the series. Yes, John Masson did it, but it took John Masson 2 worlds to figure out that the Cooper gang was punking him. General Sal did it in a matter of literally like a few minutes, maybe even an hour at best. It's just crazy how this man managed to see through the gang's disguises and raid their hideout that quickly. Plus, add to the fact that he's actually really good at hand-to-hand combat, plus his use of black magic is actually pretty skillful, and this man is anything but his species says he is. So, he's not only one of my favorite villains in this series, but one of my favorite characters in the series in general, because they actually went there in making him one of the most hated men in this game. Plus, A Cold Alliance is probably my favorite chapter in the series, and favorite world to travel around from time to time. Number 2. Neela from Sly 2. Guys, if I ever make a video talking about my top 10 favorite Sly Cooper characters, Neela has to be my favorite one right next to Sly Cooper, and for good reason too. Neela, in my opinion, is the ultimate backstabber, someone who uses people for whatever she wants and then dumps them afterwards after she got what she wanted out of them. Okay, that kind of sounded weird. Like, the way I said it, it kind of made it sound like, you know... don't think about it too hard. Don't think about it too hard. So we first meet Neela in Cairo with Carmelita and Sly. Carmelita accuses Sly of stealing the Clockwork parts, but Neela thinks otherwise, believing that the Claw Gang is more so the group that would actually achieve in stealing the Clockwork parts. And because of this, Sly takes that information and sets out on a journey to steal all the Clockwork parts back. And believe it or not, Neela actually helps us out in the first few chapters because she feels that working with a thief can help a cop out whenever they can't get into something without a warrant. So this is where Sly comes in at, and where Sly could like potentially be an undercover cop in the future one day. Unfortunately, he went back to thieving in Sly 4, but you know, of course there's that. She actually managed to help Sly and the gang steal the Clockwork tail feathers, the Clockwork wings, and one half of the Clockwork heart. And it seemed like she was going to help steal the other half of the Clockwork heart. But this is where the story gets very interesting from here. Neela doesn't help Sly steal the other half of the Clockwork heart from Rajan, and Rajan zaps Sly because of this. Murray goes to tend to Sly while also defeating Rajan, and Neela shows up. And it seems like Neela is gonna help us get back onto the ground, only to see that she had betrayed us, and she had actually gotten Interpol to come and arrest Sly and Murray and Rajan. But to add more spice to the story, Neela actually betrays Carmelita too, by saying that Carmelita was working with the Cooper Gang and showing a photo of Carmelita and Sly dancing together at Rajan's ballroom during this whole thing. And the reason she did that was so she could get Carmelita out of the way so that she could go after the Clockwork parts herself now that she turned in the Cooper Gang. Well, 2 members at least. So we see Neela again in episode 5 of Sly 2, in which that Neela is sent on a job to stop the Contesta's corruption, and she's given basically a blank check to start a war with the Contesta. She manages to steal the eye too for a brief period of time before getting trapped by the Contesta's web and then knocked away from the Contesta. But she managed to arrest Contesta, and she would later return in John Mason's world, where she would try to steal the Clockwork lungs and stomach too, but then gets thwarted by the Cooper Gang in the process as well. Then we see her show up again, this time in Apeggio's blimp, where it turns out that she was a secret member of the Claw Gang this whole time and was in cahoots with helping the Claw Gang steal the Clockwork parts, and apparently she was in closer with Apeggio because her and Apeggio had planned to steal the Clockwork parts back and reassemble Clockwork together so that Apeggio could have immortality. But then she betrays Apeggio because Neela wanted immortality for herself, and that she was just using Apeggio just so the Clockwork parts could be put back together, outsmarting Apeggio with his own plan, and then killing him afterwards. See what I mean when I say that Neela just uses people for whatever she wants until she gets what she wants and then dumps them afterwards? So Neela is fused with the Clockwork parts and is now named Clockwork. Yeah, that name isn't very popular with a lot of people, and I understand why. I personally don't mind it at all, because I personally think, you know, combining her name with Clockwork's name, it definitely makes sense why she used that name. But again, I don't mind it, but I understand why people don't like it. So in Clockwork's new body, basically Neela's circling around Apeggio's blimp, gathering all the hate she can get from the Northern Lights while traveling back to Paris. But it's all a moot point anyway, because you know the Cooper Gang's doing everything in their power to stop Clockwork from basically coming back to life fully powered and fully ready to dominate the world again. So it is through sheer intelligence, determination, and willpower, along with the help of Carmelita, that the Cooper Gang is able to stop the Clockwork from ever coming back again. However, Neela isn't through with the Cooper gang just yet. Angry that she was thwarted by her plans and basically she's about to get destroyed, Neela does one last thing that leaves her impact on the Cooper gang for the rest of their lives. While Bentley was disarming Clockwork trying to get the hate chip, he managed to get the hate chip, but Neela's mouth closed on Bentley, crippling his legs for good. After the fight, Carmelita shows up too late, but she takes it out on the next thing at hand. She destroys the hate chip, thus aging the bird and causing Clockwork and Neela to both die in the process. At least until we found out in Sly 4 that one of the eyes actually remained intact this entire time. And who knows, maybe Clockwork and Neela will resurface again one day, which will be to my delight, but that's just me. Neela's impact on the Cooper gang cannot be stated enough. You never would have thought that someone who was this nice, quote unquote, at the beginning would actually be this manipulative and this immoral in her actions, long enough that she almost achieved her goal of gaining immortality. Neela basically tricked every single person in the game and used everybody that she felt was worthy enough to get what she wanted, and she almost came terrifyingly close to achieving her goal of immortality with the Clockwork body. She remains one of my favorite Sly Cooper characters of all time because of how intricate her plan is and how she basically just went about using everybody to her advantage, and what she could have potentially did if she didn't want the Clockwork body. Maybe she could have been another potential Sly villain that was just beyond anything that Sly or the gang could have imagined. And personally, I hope that Neela returns in a future game one day. And, you know, that's all I'm going to have to say about her. She's definitely one of my favorite villains, and she's one of my favorite characters in the whole series. And she would have easily gotten #1 if it wasn't for another villain. It's obvious to anybody who played the series that is Sly's greatest villain in history. But first, let's recap. Number 10, LaFouille. Number 9, Don Octavio. Number 8, Rajan. Number 7, Mugshot. Number 6, the Contesta. Number 5, Apeggio. Number 4, Dr. M. Number 3, General Sal. And number 2, Neela. Okay, so now let's get to the number 1 pick on the list. So obviously, Sly fans should know already who I'm gonna say is number 1. But for those that don't know, ladies and gentlemen, the number 1 greatest Sly Cooper villain of all time is Clockwork from Sly 1, along with appearances in Sly 2, 3, and 4, and probably the 5th game too. I mean, was there any doubt really? Clockwork is easily Sly's greatest villain of all time, and is my favorite villain of Sly Cooper in history, right next to Neela. Before I can go into detail about what makes Clockwork his greatest villain, let's go over his backstory. According to the video games and a couple of instruction manuals that I've seen over the years, it appears that Clockwork has been around since the dawn of time, and has followed the Cooper history throughout, and it's from this moment. And I like to take it that he's been around since the days of Bob Cooper, because you can even see Clockwork in Bob Cooper's area. And it seems to me that this hatred had to stem from something. Whether it was jealousy, whether it was hate, or maybe, who knows, maybe Bob stole one of Clockwork's eggs or something, I don't know. All we know is that Clockwork's had a vendetta against the Cooper gang for many, many centuries. And he decided to build robotic parts to replace his actual body, and then install inside himself a hate chip that could keep him immortal and alive for hundreds and hundreds of generations. And so this takes us to the first game, and if my theory is correct about what Dr. M tipping off Clockwork, then Clockwork found Connor Cooper along with the rest of the Fiendish Five, and they attacked and brutally murdered Connor Cooper and left Sly to be orphaned while also stealing his devious raccoonist book. And while Sly managed to take down the other gang members with pure ease, he had trouble dealing with Clockwork because Clockwork is so strong and so powerful, and he's basically driven by the hate that he has inside of him. Sly did manage to defeat Clockwork, but only temporarily, because Clockwork would resurface again at the Cairo Museum as an inanimate object. Although this was the place where the Claw Gang would steal his body parts and try to reassemble them again. And through tricky maneuvering and a bit of luck, the Cooper Gang and Carmelita managed to destroy the Clockwork parts for good. Or so it seemed, because, at least according to Sly 4, one of the Clockwork eyes remained intact after the hate chip had been destroyed, and it seems to be in possession of Sly and the gang, and probably hidden in the vault that Bentley installed for the Cooper Gang history after everyone went their separate ways before the events of Sly 4 happened. So, without a doubt, there may be an opportunity that Clockwork resurfaces once again, which also means that another character, Neela, who fused with Clockwork, could potentially see the light again too. But we'll never know. Only Sly 5 can tell that if Sly 5 ever comes out. So we just have to keep praying. Maybe we'll get some answers pretty soon. Number one, he's the reason why the whole Sly Cooper series got started in the first place. If it wasn't for him attacking and killing Connor Cooper, Sly would have never became a thief that he was, nor would he have met Bentley or Murray to help him. And even though he's passed away, his legacy still lives on through Bentley, because Bentley's legs are crippled forever, and Sly has to live with that constant pain and reminder of letting Bentley get crippled like that because of Clockwork. Also, that also rings true to what Clockwork's last words were to Sly Cooper which was, "Cooper, you will never be rid of me." And given that the Clockwork eye is still intact, even after everything that happened, shows that Clockwork's words are very true, and that he will continue to haunt Sly for the rest of his life, maybe even his future generation as well. And plus, out of all the cold-blooded killers that Sly's dealt with in his history, I'd say Clockwork is without a doubt the most cold-blooded of them all, because he literally killed Sly's father with no remorse whatsoever. And plus, he's literally driven by the hate that started everything for him. That hate chip, if it wasn't for that hate chip, Clockwork wouldn't even be alive right now. And in my opinion, Clockwork is without a doubt the villain of all villains in Sly's history, and one that should never be taken lightly. Alright guys, that concludes today's video. I honestly thoroughly enjoyed making this video along with the last one. If you guys have an opinion on who you think is Sly's greatest villain, or villain that's overrated or underrated in your opinion, let me know down in the comments section. I love enjoying and hearing everybody's thoughts and opinions on what should happen in this series. And I'll come back to you with another Sly Cooper video. Not sure what the topic is going to be just yet, but if you guys have any suggestions, leave them down below in the comment section and I'll read them and see what I can do with them. My name is Lancey, and I'm out. Peace.